This is Kate at the Library of Whispers, and today I am reading to you the second part of my ghost story titled Hallows House. This part is called Miss Elizabeth Pike. Let's begin. At the mention of murder, I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. "Rachel, I don't like the sound of this," I said. "Mum, don't worry, it was ages ago," she said. "Look, this is something else from the package. A newspaper cutting from the Monk's Ferry Chronicle, with the date November 2nd, 1872. Rachel smoothed out the old wrinkled newspaper cutting and began to read. Murder at Monk's Ferry. The mysterious death of the only daughter of the late Mr. Alpheus Pike, Esquire, is occupying the attention of the authorities at Monk's Ferry. Miss Elizabeth Pike was found dead last night, All Hallows Even, at approximately 11 o'clock in the evening, in the drawing room of the family residence, the Old Hall at Monk's Ferry. 24-year-old Miss Pike was recently engaged to be wed to the Reverend Charles Griffin, vicar of All Hallows Church in the same town, and a recent engagement ball was held for family friends and local dignitaries at the family's residence. Detective Sergeant Josiah Heath from the Monk's Ferry Constabulary, who was one of the first on the scene, reports that the deceased was found slumped upon a sofa with a silk scarf wrapped tightly around her neck, the obvious cause of death being strangulation. There were some signs of struggle, but little evidence could be found of any intruder, either on the premises or in the grounds. We are informed that heavy rain that evening had hampered a thorough search of the estate, and we are to believe that any evidence has likely been lost. The deceased was discovered by the housekeeper, Mrs. Fogg, who entered the room to attend to the fire grate. When asked why she had not attended to her mistress earlier in the evening, she explained that she had been given firm instructions not to bother Miss Pike or her guests, but that later she had felt compelled to attend to the fire before she retired for the evening. We are told that the identities of the deceased's guests are still unknown, and that there was no other person or persons in the house that evening. An inquest will take place on the 4th of November. Rachel put the clipping down on the floor and looked at me expectantly. "Poor young woman," I sighed. "Is there anything else? Do we find out what happened? Was it murder?" "There are more clippings," she answered. "Take a look at this one. It's about the engagement party." I drew the lamp closer to me and read out the date on top of the clipping. 18th of October, 1872. "So, a couple of weeks before," I said. "Yes," answered Rachel. "It's in the City Mail, I think, so must have been a big event." I began reading. Grand Ball at Monk's Ferry. On Saturday last, a grand ball was held at the Old Hall, Monk's Ferry, to celebrate the engagement of Miss Elizabeth Pike, only daughter of local shipbuilder, the late Mr. Alpheus Pike, Esquire, to the Reverend Charles Griffin, vicar of All Hallows Church, second son of Sir Bertram Griffin, Esquire, and Lady Constance Griffin of London. This most brilliant affair was hosted by Miss Pike's brothers, Mr. Ebenezer Pike and Mr. Joseph Pike, architects of the town. In attendance were the Reverend Griffin's 4 brothers, Lieutenant Cornelius see, I laughed. How curious. Rachel nodded and motioned for me to continue. As well as a large circle of the aristocracy and gentry of the neighbourhood, numbering some 180 ladies and gentlemen. The ballroom at the Old Hall was beautifully decorated with Miss Pike's favourite blooms, the white lily, placed in pleasing positions, accompanied by evergreens and other flowers of all descriptions. Wild red roses adorned the musicians' gallery, and the crests of both the Pike and Griffin families were hung resplendent above that. The supper table was gorgeously laid out in the dining room, and a most magnificent stuffed peacock in full plumage graced the top of the table, which was, in turn, laid out with the most refined delicacies. We are informed that the peacock is the symbol of the Pike family. Due to the recent death of the cook at the Old Hall, Mr. and Mrs. Elijah Fogg from the Merry Monk Inn provided the victuals at very short notice. The only event that marred the evening's gaiety slightly was the sudden illness taken by the wife of the Honourable Mr. Arthur Bertram, the Mayor of Monk's Ferry. Fortunately, the Reverend Griffin's brother, Dr. Cuthbert Griffin, was on hand to attend to the lady, and we are informed that Mrs. Bertram recovered fully upon her swift return home. Despite this, dancing and gaiety was kept up till a late hour. A most wonderful time was had by all. What a magnificent occasion, I said, putting the newspaper clipping down on the table. I can almost see the beautiful flowers and magnificent ballroom in my mind's eye. But Rachel, I can't bear it, to think that only 2 weeks later it would all end in tragedy. I'm not sure I want to read any more. Rachel picked up the clippings and stuffed them back in the envelope. Mum, it was a long time ago. Elizabeth Pike has been dead for 150 years or something. She's been resting over there in a grave long before even your grandparents were born, she exclaimed, pointing to the churchyard at the back of the house. How do you know where she's buried? I asked, with some irritation at her tone. I don't, Mum, but it makes sense, doesn't it? Said Rachel, picking up on my irritation. She was going to marry the vicar dude of the church that's right next to her own house. It's obvious, in fact, she continued. I think we should go over there tomorrow and try and find the gravestone. The vicar dude, I laughed. Rachel, honestly. She grinned at me, and I pushed my chair back with a scrape and stood up. Okay, I'm tired, Rach. It's been another busy day unpacking. Look, I'll take a glance over some more of those papers in the morning. The next morning was bright and sunny. I wandered into the kitchen, and through the back window I caught sight of Rachel outside in wellies and winter coat, poking about in the bushes and fruit trees at the far end of the yard. I knocked on the window to get her attention, and she looked back at me with a beaming smile, waving something that glinted in the sunshine. She mouthed something at me which I didn't understand, so I shrugged, shook my head and gestured for her to come back inside. The key, she exclaimed as she came through the back door. I found where the key fits. There's an old wooden gate in the wall at the bottom of the garden. You can't see it because it's hidden behind all the overgrown bushes. Really? I said. I thought we had all the keys for the house. The estate agent never mentioned a garden gate. How on earth did you find it? If I tell you, you'll think I'm a lunatic, she answered, looking down at her feet, a little embarrassed. Should I ask? I said. I had a restless night again. I had another one of those in summer. She shrugged and stopped. I knew you'd think I was a lunatic. I reached for her hand and squeezed it. Rach, I'm only kidding. Maybe reading all those old documents is rubbing off on you in some way, affecting your dreams. She pulled her hand away from mine a little cross. If this is all my imagination, then how do you explain the fact that the red gate from my dream actually exists and is in exactly the place I thought it would be? I don't know, I said. Maybe it was mentioned in one of those old papers. Look, Rach, let's get some breakfast and I'll come out and take a look at it with you. However you came across it, the gate is there and I'm curious to see it. Did you manage to open it with the key? I didn't read about it in the old papers, she said stubbornly. And no, I couldn't get the gate open. The key fits, but it doesn't turn all the way. I'm going to need some help. 3/4 of an hour later, and I had donned my own wellies, warm coat and gloves. The sun was still shining, but it disguised the cold of an early northern November. Rachel had declined breakfast, grabbed a quick cup of tea and returned to the garden. She was busy pulling away bits of bush and overgrown weeds from the area near the gate with various old gardening tools she must have found in the old shed. I joined her, and soon I could see parts of the worn red wooden gate come into view. See, she said to me, taking out the key from her pocket, brushing away some of the excess weeds around the lock and placing the key inside. It turned, as she had told me, but seemed to get stuck halfway. We need some WD-40, I said. What the hell is that? Said Rachel, smiling. I laughed. It's a spray, a lubricant. It'll help loosen up the rust inside the lock. There should be some in one of the boxes we brought from our old garage. I returned some minutes later, spray in hand, and after applying it, Rachel tried the key again. This time she was able to turn it without much effort, and we heard a satisfying click. Rachel smiled at me. Good old WD-50 or whatever it's called, she said. We still have a bit of a problem though, Rach, I said. I can't see a handle or any way of pulling the gate open. Looking at this mark in the wood, she replied, there used to be a handle. She tugged and pulled at the sides of the old wooden gate with her hands, but it wouldn't budge. She sighed in frustration. Do we have a crowbar, Mum? We don't want to destroy it, Rachel, I answered. Look, why don't we leave this for now and go round to the churchyard? You wanted to search the gravestones, look for Elizabeth Pike. Yeah, okay, let's do that, she said, a bit reluctant to leave the mysteries of the doorway behind. We still need to think of a way of getting into this gate, though. The entrance to All Hallows Church was just past the bend in the road on Monk's Ferry Lane. We walked side by side under the old covered church gateway and part way down the stone path towards the ancient building. Did you know, said Rachel, turning to me, that gateway we just came through is called a lich gate? No, I didn't. I smiled at her and looked back at the old wooden structure. From what I remember from uni, the word lich is a Saxon word, which means corpse, said Rachel, and the lich gate was there to protect the coffin or the body from the weather while the funeral party waited for the vicar, or something like that anyway. Oh, I said, slightly dismayed. I thought it might have a more cheery explanation. Rachel rolled her eyes at me. Mum, we're in a graveyard. What did you expect? I thought it might have something to do with weddings. Keep the bride dry, something like that, I answered. Rachel laughed. Well, it probably had that use too. We stopped stones of every description could be seen dotted around the church building, and some older areas were quite overgrown. "Rach, this is going to be a bit of a needle in a haystack search, isn't it? We have no idea where Elizabeth Pike would have been buried," I said. "Well, you say that," she answered, "but we know that she died in 1872, and that she was from a distinguished family from next door at the old hall. So let's start over there in the older section and look for some kind of grand arrangement of graves, or a family plot or something. Why don't you start at one end and I'll start at the other?" "In the overgrown bit?" I asked despondently, and began to walk down a smaller gravel-covered path towards the back of the church. "Good job you've got your wellies on," shouted Rachel, laughing, as she wandered off in the other direction. I searched and searched in the long wet grass for what seemed like an age, and I was just about to give up because of the cold seeping through my wellies to my toes, when I heard Rachel shout at the top of her lungs, "Mum, found it!" She was waving at me frantically from an area at the far side of the church boundary, close to the stone wall that separated the old hall from the graveyard. When I reached her, she was hunched down, brushing off debris from the surface of the dirty white marble gravestone with her hands. She looked up at me. "She's here," she said. "I was just about to call it a day, Rach. Can you read the inscription?" I asked. "Yes, just about. It says, 'Here lies the body of fair Elizabeth Pike, mistress of the old hall, loving and only sister of Ebenezer and Joseph, taken from this mortal life on Hallows Even, October 1872, aged 24 years. Sweet sister, high-born in spirit and in virtue, she lived and she laughed and she loved. Short was her stay in this world, cruelly stolen from our sight, now residing between the earth and the heavens. We shall not rest until her soul is freed.'" "Gosh, that's unusual," I said, looking at Rachel, who was brushing more weeds and dirt away from the bottom of the grave. "We will not rest," I repeated. "Until her soul is freed," finished Rachel, turning her head to look up at me. "Do you think that's what we have to do, Mum? Help to free her soul?" I frowned. "Hold on. Seriously, Rach, and how would we do that precisely? We know nothing about what happened to this poor young woman after she was murdered. I mean, we don't even know if it was murder. And even if it was, maybe they caught the perpetrator years later or sooner. As you said to me, she's been lying in this grave for 150 years. Why would the family, the descendants of the family, contact us now with bits of old documents and a key? What do we have to do with it? It's ridiculous." Rachel stood up abruptly and stared straight at me. "You're impossible," she exclaimed. "You're not the one who's been having all the stupid dreams. She was murdered. I don't know why I know that, but I do. And what other assistance could we give to these people, this family, if it wasn't to find out who her murderer was, so that they can all rest in peace? It says so on the grave." She stopped, and we both looked at each other. "Rachel, do you hear what you're saying?" I answered, as calmly as I could after her sudden outburst. "A random stranger brings an envelope to our front door on a rainy Halloween evening, and all of a sudden we become ghost hunters." "I said you're impossible," she shouted, looking at me angrily, and then strode off in a huff towards the stone path. I watched her slip onto the cemetery lich gate, and she was gone. I pinched my lip concerned. What had provoked the outburst and this ridiculous idea? It was probably best to leave her to calm down a little bit. If I knew my daughter as well as I hoped I did, she'd be fine by the time I got back home. I looked down at the marble gravestone and realised that Rachel hadn't read out the inscription that she'd uncovered at the bottom of the stone. I hunched down and read to myself. Also laid in this ground, Ebenezer Alpheus Pike of Hallows House, who died suddenly 5th of September 1911, aged 68 years. Also, Joseph Pike of Hallows House, who died tragically at sea, aged 77 years, on the 7th of May 1920. Death shall not quench the search for truth. Tragic story that, said a male voice from behind me. Startled, I stood up from my crouched position and turned to face the direction of the voice. I realised it was the figure with the dog that I'd seen bent over a gravestone when we'd first entered the graveyard. Didn't mean to make you jump, he said. I heard a bit of shouting and thought I'd best come over, see if you needed any help. Oh, nothing, I'm fine, we're fine, I answered awkwardly, but thanks. I come out here most days. It's the missus, you see, over there. He pointed back towards the gravestone he'd been tending. Oh, I'm sorry, I said. No need, he replied plainly. We stood in a bit of awkward silence. I cleared my throat. You said something about a tragic story, I asked, pointing at the Pike family's gravestone. Oh yes, tragic, he repeated. He turned and looked over towards the derelict old hall. My great-grandfather, Albert, was brought up in that house, the old manor house, when the Pikes lived there. Grand place at the time. Not now, though. He would have been about 14 years of age when the mistress was murdered. The mistress? I asked him. You mean Elizabeth Pike? Yes, although locals knew her as Lizzie, of course. Kind woman from all accounts. Her portrait hangs in Monk's Ferry Library, in the archives reading room, if I'm not mistaken. Think her father too, Alpheus, bit of a philanthropist round these parts. Oh, I said, surprised. My daughter works there, part-time. He didn't respond, and we stood in another awkward silence again. I wasn't completely sure he'd heard me. Then, without my prompting, he began speaking again. She was murdered, you know, in her own home. My great-grandfather Albert, did I tell you that, was at the funeral. His mother was housekeeper at the old hall. All the town came out. Tragic. He paused to reach down to pet his tiny dog before continuing. After that, the brothers, they're buried here with her, you know, were by all accounts heartbroken. Couldn't live in the old hall any longer. Haunted by something, they say. Her memory, maybe. Some say her ghost, but I don't believe in those things. He paused again, and I was just about to speak when he continued. Which is why they built that house over there. They call it Hallows House. They moved in, and the old hall eventually went to rack and ruin. Nobody would have it. He pointed to the roof of our house, which you could see poking out above the trees and overgrown foliage. That's my house, I said. I live there, or at least in half of it. Aye, he said. Been empty for a while. That part at least, he answered. Yes, we only moved in a week ago. That is my daughter and I. We had no idea it had been one house until the last couple of days, I said. Do you know why they split the house into two? After the brothers died, he answered. Neither wed. There were no descendants, you see. So whoever bought the house divided it into two, I asked. He nodded back and stamped his feet against the cold. Anyway, must be getting along, he said, and picked up the tiny dog in his arms. Thank you, I said as he began to walk away. Nice to meet you. He made no reply, but just as he was halfway down the cemetery path, he turned back and shouted over to me. They say there are ancient underground passages about this place, all the way from the old hall down to the priory and the river. I'm Stanley, and this is Bella, he said, pointing at the dog in his arms. If you want to know any more, I'm at Catlow Cottages, number 2. Just ring the bell. I waved in acknowledgement and shouted thanks back to him. When I got back home, I went through to the kitchen and put the kettle on. My hands were freezing despite having been inside gloves. I lit the large fire and settled into the wooden rocking chair at the side of the fireplace. The hot mug of steaming tea was a welcome relief from the cold and damp outside. I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Rachel came into the kitchen with the brown envelope parcel under her arm. She threw herself down on the comfy chair opposite me. Mom, I'm an idiot, she said, looking at me and sighing. You're absolutely right. This is ridiculous. I'm ridiculous. I don't know what's got into me. I think I'm just tired. The move and everything, maybe. You're right. What does any of this have to do with us? We should probably keep the key, but this stuff should go on the fire. She was just about to throw the package and its contents onto the now roaring fire when I quickly intervened. No, Rachel, I said. Don't do that. I don't know what's going on either, but what I do know is that I'd still like to find out more. Are you sure? She asked, holding the envelope still precariously close to the fire. Yes, I am, I answered. First things first, we should go and visit Miss Elizabeth Pike in the library. And that ends the second part of my ghost story, Hallows House. I hope you enjoyed it. I will be writing the third part very soon, and hope to have that for you. This has been Kate at the Library of Whispers, saying I shall see you very soon. Bye bye for now.